Hey everyone, welcome back. And today I'm going to be doing what if Russia decides to form an empire? So, a few years of Russia having like some protests, they decide to overthrow the government and replace it with an imperial one. So, with Russia now becoming imperial, they decide that they will want to expand their territory. So, after they discuss some plans, they discuss that first they will want to bring back the Soviet Union. So they decide to go after the weakest countries in Europe and Asia. And first, they decide to go after the Caucasus. So they go down, and then eventually they declare war on Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. So already with the occupations in Abkhazia and the South Ossetia, they're able to already make a Georgia collapse very fast, soon going into Azerbaijan, capturing their capital, and then making the fall of Armenia. So let's look at the peace treaty. So here's the peace treaty. We see the full annexation of Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. So they decide to go over to Europe and then look at Belarus. As Belarus is technically like a Russian puppet, or I mean basically just any Russian ally, they already get annexed. And then with this, they already have very easy access to close the Suwalki gap and then just taking out Ukraine, Moldova, and the Baltics. So with them already declaring war on Ukraine, yeah, they pretty much, I mean, yet to this, it's still the same border like this. But then eventually, Ukraine is able to make an offensive into Belarus, and a very big one, capturing its capital Minsk, and soon connecting up with the Baltics. But with this, they managed to put a lot more manpower into the war, and then they're able to go more into Ukraine, soon threatening Kiev, and pushing back the Ukrainians out of the Belarus territory. And then they're able to declare war on the Baltics, needing more manpower. And then with the Baltics holding out with the Ukrainian power as well, they're able to hold out for quite some time, but then eventually they are doing some naval invasion. Soon Tallinn falls, Riga falls, and then, yeah, the Baltics completely fall. And with the manpower of the Baltics, they go over to Ukraine, and then soon they make the country collapse. And then they go over to Moldova, demanding for their annexation. And then, as they can't defeat this whole entire country, Moldova would have to comply with the request, and eventually, Moldova surrenders. So let's look at the peace treaty. So here we see the full annexation of the Baltics, Ukraine, and Moldova. So, with the extra manpower and the extra armies, they decide to look over to Central Asia, and they declare war on Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. So, with all of the Central Asian countries working together, they are able to hold off the Russians a little bit, but then soon they are able to storm into Kazakhstan, soon taking them over, and then going over to Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. And then eventually, Turkmenistan collapses. So let's look at the peace treaty. So here we see the full annexation of the Central Asian countries, and now they formally brought back the Soviet Union. So here we see they could go after Afghanistan, since they did fail that in the last time they fought with it. So they declare war on Afghanistan. And then with Afghanistan coming out, I mean, let's just say that they're extremely weak because ex- uh, they're now recovering from their civil war. It was a long time ago, but let's just say they had another one, which made them fairly weak. And then with the mountains, they are able to slowly advance, but then eventually they get past the mountains. Soon, Afghanistan falls. And then Since they're there, they could attack Iran, so that's what they do. With the Iranians now having to fight in a two front war, the Russians are able to advance into this mountainous terrain, soon connecting up with the Persian Gulf, and then soon they're able to advance from Afghanistan and Turkmenistan, soon capturing a lot of territory and at the same time threatening Iran's capital in both sides. And then eventually their capital falls, now connecting up with the Caspian Sea. And then a few months later of advancing into Iran, they collapse. So let's look at the peace treaty. So here we see the full annexation of Iran, and we see Iran being split into two, the northern part, including Tehran, being fully annexed, now having full control over the Caspian Sea, and the southern part of Iran being turned into a puppet state. So here's what the map looks like now. Finland sees this, and they're completely traumatized from what they saw, because then the Russians declare war on the Finnish. So with the Finnish now fully mobilized, they start advancing into Russian territory, soon capturing St. Petersburg, and then they manage to cut them off from this area, and then soon this whole entire part falls over to the Finnish. So with the Russians losing a lot of territory, yeah, they try to push them back, which they are able to, but eventually they're stopped because of the cold. So as the first Winter War, the Finnish had to give a little bit of some territory, even though they didn't collapse. So, with the Finnish now learning what to do, they're able to capture more territory, and with also them being fully adjusted to the cold more than the Russians, they are able to surround this lake and then eventually go into more Russian territory, eventually going into the Baltics, soon going to the Estonian islands, and then with the Russians fearing they could go over to Moscow anytime, they decide to comply with the Finnish and sue for peace. So let's look at the peace treaty. So here's the peace treaty. We see Finland gaining territory, while but with Russia facing this humiliating defeat, they decide that they would go over to Mongolia, and then they declare war on them. So with the Mongolians pretty weak, yeah, they already surrender, and then they go over to China requesting for some territory. They refuse it, and then with them not wanting to face another humiliating defeat, they decide to not declare war. So they just decide to keep Mongolia, and then eventually Mongolia is completely annexed. And then with Russia now gaining and losing some territory, they could conclude their empire here, but they decide that they will want some revenge soon. So they go over to Poland, and then eventually they're now forced to being like turned into a puppet state as I mean they go over to Eastern Europe, and then they demand Poland and then some other countries to become puppet states, and those are once again Poland, Czechia, Slovakia, Hungary, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Romania, Bulgaria, Serbia, Montenegro, Kosovo, Albania, and North Macedonia. So, with these countries now, just like the Warsaw Pact, yeah, they now have extremely fear of Western Europe. No, Western Europe now fears the new Russian Empire. So, they decided that they would demand some aid from other countries, okay, more puppet states. So, they go over here, and then they get Greece, Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and Cyprus. So, with many protests happening in these puppet states, the Russians don't care. So they go over back to Finland. And then, once again, they declare war. And with the Finnish not being prepared, yeah, they storm into their once occupied territory, bringing back to their old territory. Soon, Helsinki falls, and then the Finnish surrender. So let's look at the peace treaty. So here's the peace treaty. We see that Finland has been fully annexed. And so this is what Russia has as their empire at its peak. So what they decide to do next is to go to war with Europe, well, with the West. So with them declaring war on Austria, they decide, let's just bring up and form in a new alliance called NATO. They bring up Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, France, Luxembourg, Switzerland, Italy, and they also get Spain, Portugal, the UK, Ireland, and then they also get some out of Europe countries, Iceland, and they also get Canada, the US. Might as well throw in a lot of more countries: Mexico, Honduras, Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, Bolivia, Peru, and then Egypt, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, India, Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and Australia. So now it's in a world war. So and we also see some rebellions happening in these puppet states. And those puppet states are Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, Albania, Hungary, Czechia, Slovakia, and Bulgaria. So with those, yeah, we see at this point it's just in a bigger world war than the other ones. So eventually the other puppet states fall, including this Turkish and Cyprus puppet state. And then it's basically Europe against the Russians. And then over here, they're able to capture all of Finland with the rest of Sweden and Norway. And then over here, we see like a lot of territories being captured. And yeah, the rest of Iran gets liberated, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. And we also see that Jordan also joins the war. And then, with some Indians going through here, through the Persian Gulf, they also managed to go into the Turkmenistan area, soon going up into Central Asia. And then, the South Koreans, Taiwanese, and Japan uh, going through here, they're able to start another front, soon going into Mongolia, connecting up with the other ones. I think it was India, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel, and Egypt. So at this point, yeah, we also see some other rebellions like in the Baltics and in Ukraine and the Caucasus. And then eventually they're very weak, and then eventually Moscow's being threatened, and then right then and there the Russians decide to surrender. So let's look at the peace treaty. So here we see that yeah, Russia got automatically destroyed, and we also see many different unions forming. So first, nothing happened in North America, nothing in the South, nothing in Africa, nothing in Oceania, not much in Asia except Iran and Afghanistan getting fully liberated. And we see in Europe, we see that Czechoslovakia has returned for economic aid between the Czech Republic and Slovakia. And we also see that Romania and Moldova has decided to form a union for economic aid. And then Yugoslavia, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, Serbia, Kosovo, and North Macedonia. And then over here, we see Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Kaliningrad, and Belarus forming a union for economic aid. Finland returns with the territory they won from the Winter War, or the Second Winter War. And then over here, we see Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan forming one union, again, for economic aid. And over here, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan formed a union for economic aid again. And then, yeah, Russia got completely obliterated, and Russia no longer exists. No longer the Russian Federation. It's just like these are now independent nations and or occupation zones. So, yeah, this is now what happens if Russia forms an empire. And oh, and also, I think oh no, so Ukraine is the only one that's not in a union for economic aid in the in the Soviet bloc. So with this, hopefully y'all like the video, and I'll see you on the next one.